Okay, I hope you are able to see my screen. So just a quick recap that we talked about the free consent, that the consent is required to be there in every contract wherever the promise is being made. Parties are promising to do something for each other. Legal relationship is there, offer acceptance is there, consideration and other essentials are there. But the consent of the party is also required to be there along with other essentials. So when we talk about the consent, so it means parties have understood all the terms and conditions in the same sense and at the same time. And as per law, it says that if the consent is affected by coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, or mistake, it is said not to be free. And if it is not free, so within the preview of law, it becomes voidable and void depending upon the circumstances. Then we have started with the first element affecting the consent, that is coercion, where we have discussed that if the parties' consent is affected by any kind of physical threat or any activity which is forbidden by IPC, and there is unlawful detaining or threatening to detain property of another, then in that case the coercion is being applied. And if the coercion is applied, the party has the right to set aside the contract becomes voidable at the option of the party whose consent has been so affected by coercion. But that party has to elect the particular contract to set aside. So until unless the party exercise its right, it cannot be set aside. So the party is required to set aside the contract and also required to prove that his consent has been affected by coercion. Along with this, we have also discussed कि coercion stranger भी apply कर सकता है, किसी भी place पे हो सकता है, और वो activity forbidden by law होनी चाहिए. So in this particular case, all these essentials we have to keep in mind. Now let's move to the second essential, that is called as undue influence. So when we talk about the undue influence, so undue influence, my friend, says that when a person is in a position to, affect the will of the other party. So in that situation, what happens? That the party is in a particular relationship where one party can influence the consent of the other party, it can influence the situation. So in that case, if that influence is being applied to dominate the will of the other or to enter into a contract, then we will say that the undue influence is being used. So in this case, when we talk about word undue, undue means which is not justified. If it is justified and you are influencing for the betterment or for the good thing of the other party, so that is that influence is accepted. But when it is undue, unjustified, this undue influence is to take advantage over the position, then in that case this will be covered under the undue influence. तो अगर influence आपका undue नहीं होगा, तो उस particular situation के अंदर वो आपका undue influence के अंदर या avoidable contract के option के अंदर आपके पास available नहीं होगा. So the important thing is that the party should have a particular relationship where one party is at a superior position and the other party is at the inferior position. It means that the party who is at the superior position is able to dominate the will of the other, right? So relationship होना चाहिए, domination of will होना चाहिए, और वो domination जो है वो contract में करने के लिए होना चाहिए, and the other person is taking undue advantage of his position. So when all these essentials would be there, then it would be called that undue influence have been used. So let's read the definition, that where undue influence says that a contract is induced by undue influence where one party takes advantage of his superior position to obtain the other's consent. तो वो consent किस लिए है? Contract में आने के लिए है. Then a contract is said to be induced by undue influence where relations subsisting between two parties are such that parties is in position to dominate the will of the other and uses that position to obtain an unfair advantage over other. So there is unequal relationship, superior inferior relationship, and it is misused by the superior party to obtain unfair advantage. तो आपके चारों essentials हो गए कि relationship होना चाहिए where one is superior, other is inferior. Third, that such relationship is such that one person is in a position to dominate the will of the other. Third, that it is being used to compel the other party to enter into the contract. Fourth, that it has given the undue advantage to the superior party. So if any of these essential is missing, तो वो undue influence में नहीं आएगा, और अगर वो undue influence में नहीं आएगा तो parties cannot set aside the contract. So in this particular case, all the four elements should be present if we say that consent is affected by undue influence. So for everything जो उसकी basic requirement है या basic requisite है, वो आपकी जो है उसमें वो फुलफिल होनी चाहिए, देन ओनली आप उस पर्टिकुलर सिचुएशन का एडवांटेज ले सकते हो. बिकॉज वी से दैट इफ द कंसेंट ऑफ द पार्टी इज अफेक्टेड बाय अनड्यू इन्फ्लुएंस, consent is not to be said to be free, and if the consent is not said to be free, the contract is voidable at the option of the party whose consent has been so affected. So voidable means that we are avoiding our responsibility, we are avoiding our legal obligation. So how we can avoid? As per law, there is legal obligation, we are bound to perform in the contract, but under certain circumstances we are excused, we are given option not to perform the contract. So where this option is given, where the particular basic requirement of undue influence as per 16 are duly fulfilled. Is it clear up till now? Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so now in continuation, we have to understand that what do we understand by the domination of will, or in which circumstances it is considered that even the law can presume that the domination of will must have been used. So first situation is that where there is a real or apparent authority. So if one person is at a superior position and he is authorized to guide or to direct the subordinate, or to order the subordinate, or to influence, or means the other person cannot say no to the order or whatever the master has said. So there comes the real or the apparent authority, where it is clear that the other person is in the position, strong position, and there are likely chances that the person is able to influence or dominate the will of the other. So in this situation, this will be called as the real or superior position. So we will consider that there are possibility of domination of the will of the other party. For example, in a particular situation, if parents ask something to be performed, but this is not to take any undue advantage, तो वहां पे domination of will तो है, but undue influence नहीं आएगा. But where the parents are taking undue advantage of their position, they are compelling the child to do something wrong, which is unethical or which is not right. You must have seen in certain kind of movies or certain series that where some parents, for the money, they compel the children to go to do the wrong thing. So that is called undue influence. Their party can set aside. But where the parents are for the best or for the interest of the children, they are dominating the will. So domination of will तो है, but वहां पे undue influence नहीं आएगा. So that's why we say कि वो चारों condition होनी चाहिए. Relationship होना चाहिए, domination of will होना चाहिए, the other person have compelled to enter into the contract, and the party who is compelling to enter into the contract is taking the undue advantage of the same. So that is, basic requirement. So real or apparent authority leads to domination of will, but where domination of will is used to obtain the undue or unfair advantage by entering into the contract, there we can set aside the contract, otherwise not. Second one is the fiduciary relationship. So fiduciary relationship is that where there you repose trust and faith in the other party, and you know that the other person is not going to misguide you, and the other person uses his position that because you repose the trust, faith, and you go by the decision of the other party. So in that case, if the other party is dominating the will and using it for availing the unfair advantage, then it will come under the undue influence. But definitely, wherever there is a fiduciary relationship, the person is in the position to dominate the will of the other. So, for example, you visit to the doctor and you tell your problem. So the doctor is going to guide you or suggest you certain kind of medicines. But if these medicines or the certain tests are specifically prescribed to have the money or to have the commission in that or to have the sale of those medicine, then in that case the doctor is taking the undue advantage of his position. So you are going to follow whatever the doctor says, but if the intention of the party or the intention of the person is to dominate the will or to take the undue advantage of that particular contract, then definitely you can set it aside. Third thing is person in mental distress. So if there is
एक्सक्यूज मी
any
मैम.
kind of yes, Vita.
मैम हमने फिड्यूशरी में यही कहा जो मतलब ट्रस्ट के बेस पे होते हैं, राइट?
Yes, yes.
मैम तो मैम बिना ट्रस्ट के तो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट हो ही नहीं सकता. लाइक किसी भी सिचुएशन में हम लोग देखेंगे तो ट्रस्ट तो होगा ही ना.
No, no. We are talking about the circumstances where the domination of will is possible. When we talk about the fiduciary relationship, so it's not required that you always take a decision on the basis of the trust and faith. For example, if I have visited to one doctor and I find I am an educated person, I have good knowledge of medicines, and I think that this particular treatment is not right or the particular doctor is not guiding or this is dominated by some other personal motive, then in that particular case I can have the second consultation.
यस मैम.
Right right so that depends upon, but when we are here talking about the concept of domination of will, कि किस किस circumstances में the other person have the superior position and can dominate your will. ठीक है.
यस
बट
मैम.
बट जब वो डोमिनेशन ऑफ विल कॉन्ट्रैक्ट में आने के लिए और अनफेयर एडवांटेज के लिए यूज होगा, देयर वी से दैट द अनड्यू इन्फ्लुएंस इज बीइंग. अदरवाइज अनड्यू इन्फ्लुएंस की चार कंडीशन है. रिलेशनशिप होना चाहिए. The party should be in the superior position to dominate the will of the other. The person should have, compelled to enter into the contract. And the lastly, the other person is taking the undue advantage. So in that particular situation, what happens? See, if doctor have prescribed certain medicine, certain treatment or certain course, and you have not joined it, तो वहां पे डोमिनेशन ऑफ विल तो है, बट इट इज नॉट, यू हैव नॉट एंटर्ड इनटू द कॉन्ट्रैक्ट, तो अनड्यू इन्फ्लुएंस कैसे हुआ?
यस मैम.
Right. So
अंडरस्टूड.
domination of will is one point for having the as an element of undue influence, right? Then there comes the mental distress. So mental distress में क्या होता है बच्चे, कि when we are physically or mentally so weak or so dependent on some other person that the other person is in a position to take advantage of the person's position, then in that case it is said that the person is in a position of domination of will. I don't know nowadays you people watch the television or not, or you watch the advertisement, or anyone have the good interest in seeking the new area. So in this case, there used to come one particular advertisement of MSEAL, that old lady, old person is on the last stage, and the person came with the property papers and got it signed, and on the particular paper there was written 10000000000 on the paper. So in that case the particular drop of water came and it fall on one, and the person died. So it was advertisement was कि एमसिल लगाया होता तो ऐसा ना होता. So this particular situation reminds me that the person is because of the illness, because of the mental and body distress, in a position that where if the other person is compelling the person to sign certain property or power of attorney or something in the name of the other person and takes the undue advantage of that particular position. So that is called as undue influence. So somehow, if we reverse the position, that time the person was ill and the papers have got signed, but after a treatment of a week or 10 days, the person is well and in health again. So in that case, the person has the right to set it aside because the papers were signed or the contract has been entered into in the position where the person was temporarily in body distress or mental distress. So जहाँ पे ऐसी situation हो, वहां पर भी the person is in a position, the person who is taking care, the family member or any relative, they are in a position to dominate the will of the other. So other person is on bed, the other person is, because of the reason of the age, illness, mental or body distress, is in a position to go by what others says because the person is not on his own. So in that case, if any contract is being entered into or the other party is taking certain undue advantage, the first party, if that particular person comes in a position, definitely can avoid the contract. The contract will be voidable at his option under the head undue influence, that his consent was not free and he has signed the or he has transferred the property in case of mental distress. So domination of will is presumed or considered in all these circumstances. Is it clear? Yes. Can we move further? Are you guys here? Yes. Is it
Yes,
clear the
ma'am.
point we have
Yes,
discussed?
ma'am.
Okay. Now we say what is the effect of undue influence. So हमने कल भी डिस्कस किया था कि सेक्शन 19 हमें ऑप्शन देता है कि एक तो आपका कॉन्ट्रैक्ट जो है voidable हो जाएगा. Voidable को हम दोबारा एक्सप्लेन नहीं करेंगे. We just simply say that a contract is voidable at the option of the party whose consent has been so caused. तो उसमें हम whose consent has been so caused भी कर सकते हैं और the party whose consent has been affected by undue influence भी use कर सकते हैं. Secondly, we have discussed that the doctrine of restitution, section 64 and 65, that is also applicable in this particular case. So doctrine of restitution, you all know, कोई भी मनी बेनिफिट एक्सेट्रा आपको मिला है, आप कॉन्ट्रैक्ट को सेट असाइड कर रहे हो, तो उसको आपको दूसरी पार्टी को रिटर्न करना है, राइट? अगेन क्वाजी कॉन्ट्रैक्चुअल ऑब्लिगेशन और लॉ ऑफ इक्विटेबल जस्टिस के ऊपर ये आपका डिपेंड करता है. ठीक है? इज इट क्लियर? Now, can anyone discuss now about the difference between the coercion and undue influence? Discuss कर लें इसको साथ में अभी.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So let's take the points of difference. The very first point, let's take the meaning or definition. मीनिंग लिखेंगे तो इट कैन बी ओपन एंडेड. डेफिनेशन लिखेंगे so you need to go by more or less near around the definition only. So anyone?
मैम ट्राई करो.
Yes, please.
Ma'am, coercion is like influencing someone, wherein you ask someone to come into contract on the gunpoint or by threatening him or her, like उस हिसाब से.
Right.
Ma'am, ma'am, physical threat or detaining or
Yeah,
threatening to detain property of
yeah,
another,
yeah. Physical threat or any act by forbidden by
forbidden
IPC,
by IPC.
and detaining. And in undue influence, you are influencing by using authority, right? Meaning में we can straight away give the definition or meaning. Then we can use the cause. What can be the cause? Physical threat, any act forbidden by IPC or detaining of property. And here we are influencing the by using the authority. Then what else? There can be the
मैम ये जो आईपीसी वाला आपने लिखा है मैम एक बार ये रिमाइंड करवाना ये क्या था?
Bache, when we talk about the any activity which is forbidden or restricted by Indian Penal Code, So these generally involve all kind of criminal activities or the activities which are harmful. So these activities, so there can be a physical threat or threatening to detain or committing of any activity which is forbidden by Indian Penal Code,
Okay, ma'am.
right? And here we are using the authority. Now the nature of force, here it is physical, here it is mental. Then we talk about relationship. In coercion, it is required.
No.
In
No, ma'am.
undue influence, it is required,
Yes.
right? Then we can talk about domination of will. It is not there. It is there, but you have to write the complete sentences. We are just talking about the heading. Then, who can apply? So, in case of coercion, we have discussed a stranger can apply this, and in this particular case, the relationship is required, right? Then, if we talk about the punishment, so in case of coercion, आईपीसी के अंदर अगर कोई क्रिमिनल एक्टिविटी है तो उसकी पनिशमेंट है एंड देयर इज नो पनिशमेंट एज सच. इसमें सिर्फ कॉन्ट्रैक्ट आपका सेट असाइड होगा, right? So these can be the possible differences. Any other difference if you can think of, just let me know. Yeah, one I forgot.
मैम बर्डन ऑफ प्रूफ का डाल सकते हैं.
Yes, yes, we can put the difference on basis of place. It can be any place, be it in India or outside India, but it should be within India only. Then we can also put the difference of burden of proof, right? So when you set aside the contract, so burden of proof
पार्टी
is
सेटिंग
one
असाइड.
party setting aside, and इसमें the other party influencing, right? So these can be the possible differences. You can note it down, and as a small assignment, you are going to write down the difference between the two in a proper format, right? Up till now, any query? Okay. Now we move to the next point where we say that there are presumption of undue influence. Presumption means that we say that when we talk about the burden of proof, so we say that the other person who is, who has employed the undue influence is required to prove that there was no undue influence. The person has entered into the contract with his sweet will. But when we say about the circumstances, or when we talk about the presumptions, so presumptions means pre assumed. We have assumed in advance that these circumstances or these relationships are such where are likely to be chances of undue influence, right? So in that particular case, in this particular case, we say that if it is already presumed, it is already been taken into account that there are likely to be chances कि अनड्यू इन्फ्लुएंस यूज हुआ होगा. तो वो कहाँ पे होता है? वहां पे सबसे पहला होता है कि देयर आर अनकॉन्शियबल बार्गेन्स, जहां पर आपको पर्टिकुलर ट्रांजैक्शंस पे लगे कि इस पर्टिकुलर ट्रांजैक्शन में कंसिडरेशन तो है ही नहीं, और देयर इज सो मच वेरिएशन दैट दिस पर्टिकुलर ट्रांजैक्शन इज नॉट normal. For example, A has transferred his property in the name of B for rupees 50,000, and the value of the property is 1 crore, right? And B is not any relative, right? There is no relation as such that he has transferred it for as a gift or as a token to the other person. So जहां पर आपका बहुत ज्यादा डिफरेंस होगा, transaction ka, so there is a possibility that the domination of will might have been used. So you will see into that particular transaction that what is the relationship between the parties. Sometimes, in certain movies, certain scenes, you must have seen that the one person has gifted a big car or a big amount of money to the other person, and later on the person came to know that he was the advisor, or he was the lawyer, or in a particular case he has helped to win the case. So what was the position, that whether it was a natural normal transaction, the person has entered into the transaction with its free consent, or there has been certain things. So एक जो consideration का amount होता है ना, we say inadequacy of consideration is immaterial subject to it is being provided by the free consent of the party. If you remember, consideration में हमने ये point discuss किया था, consideration need not be adequate. So there we discuss inadequacy of consideration is immaterial, condition being it is being provided by the free consent of the party. तो consideration होनी चाहिए, वो appropriate है नहीं है, best bargain है नहीं है, best price है नहीं है, it does not matter. Matter क्या करता है कि consideration is there and the consideration is given by the free consent of the party. So if there is certain kind of very unreasonable consideration, and there are possibilities that the other person is in the position of domination of will, so there is a presumption that if we wish to set aside the contract, so we can presume that undue influence might have been used, right? Another situation can be that there is the fiduciary relationship. So हमें पता कैसे चलेगा? Because when we set aside the contract, we say that the contract is voidable at the option of the other party. So once we go to court of law and we select the option to set aside the contract, so in those particular circumstances, what happens that we see that what is the relationship between the parties? What was the amount of consideration in the particular contract? So if there is a fiduciary relationship and the other person wants to set aside the contract, so we can presume that in the fiduciary relationship there were likely chances that the other person might have dominated the will of the other. Then another situation can be in the case of the case of Pardanashi women. It means that these females are not allowed to have any contact with the society. Their identity is, not shared. So in this case, if any of the contract has been entered into by them and they wish to set aside the contract, so there are likely chances that the undue influence must have been used. So in सारी situations में where we talk about कि ट्रस्ट एंड फेथ रिलेशनशिप है या अनकॉन्शनेबल ट्रांजेक्शन है या पर्दानिशी वुमेन के साथ ट्रांजेक्शन है, so in that particular case we presume there is a presumption by law that there are likely chances that the domination of will has been used to compel the other party to enter into the contract. So this becomes a situation of presumption of undue influence, right? Is it clear? So that's it in case of undue influence. So what we have discussed today, meaning of undue influence, right? Meaning of undue influence, prerequisites, then we have discussed about the other than prerequisite, where is there is a domination of will. Then we have discussed about the
Difference.
presumption. Then we have discussed about the effect, and then we have discussed about the difference between coercion and undue influence. Right? So I hope up till now the particular concept is clear to all of you. Right? So let me take the queries, if any, and then we will start with the misrepresentation.